Today in meeting management, we are shifting our focus. This is SPCM 4397, Effective Meeting Management. We've talked about large conventions in our last session. We had the mayor of West University with us talking about the importance of agendas and planning ahead and knowing your group. And he also stressed how they stayed under Robert's Rules of Order. And we've talked previously this semester how most organizations in this country use Robert's Rules of Order as their parliamentary authority. Some use Sturgis Standard Code of Parliamentary Practice. There are other shorter forms such as Kesey or Demeter or Farwell, some others that may be options for groups that need minimal guides to parliamentary procedure. But today we are going to start looking specifically at the motions that are involved when business is being conducted. And you'll recall last week we said that the greater the formality of the organization, the more likely we are to need formal procedures. So you may find some small groups of 5 or 7 that still use pretty rigid procedures. Other small groups that size may function more like committees, may function along the line of the group dynamics that you discussed and heard about when Dr. Williamson was with you. But assuming that we have a group that needs some formal procedure, whether it's the Faculty Senate of the university, which recently got into a hoopla and wasn't sure whether or not they'd passed a motion or not. I indicated a national president that had called me recently and was having problems knowing whether or not authority had been granted for certain things. With the assumption that we need to follow parliamentary procedure and that we are going to use motions, then we take on an extra set of dimensions for the meeting, which is different from just functioning as a committee working around until we compromise and get consensus. One of the first things that has to happen is that business has to get on the floor. We've talked about the agenda already, the call to order and committee reports and so forth. Well, assuming we are either under unfinished business or we've moved into new business, there needs to be and we'll just assume we're under new business for the purposes of today. We need to get business on the floor. You know, there's some groups that sit around and they sort of chat about things, and then at some point the chairman says, well, you know, is this what we want to do? Well, when you can work that way, you're working with a kind of informal consensus. But if you needed to get business on the floor for a vote, what do you think you would do? How do you get business in front of an organization?
Call for a motion to make that known that you want to discuss something, or have it on the agenda ahead of time.
Okay, and even if it's on the agenda, somebody still has to make a motion. Remember the mayor telling you last time, I want to know who's going to make that motion and who's going to second it. So a popular way of, the common way of getting business on the floor is to make a main motion. Now somebody has to do that, and they have to speak words in order to do that. Okay? You may say, the best language is, I move that, and then specify what it is that you want to have done. I move that we paint the trash cans red, white, and blue, and somebody needs to second it. Or I move that this organization purchase a new computer and printer, or just computer, you know, whatever it is that you want the group to address. So in the initial stage, the person's going to have to get recognized. Robert says you stand up and address the chair, you know, Madam President, Mr. Chairman, whatever the title for that person is in that particular situation, and that will vary some from group to group. But you address the presiding officer and get recognized. And the more formal it is, then the presiding officer will say something like, the chair recognizes Mr. Smith or Ms. Jones. The chair recognizes the person. Then the person is entitled to do whatever it is that they rose to do, to make whatever kind of motion they've been recognized to make, and so forth. It's poor form to say, I make a motion that, or something like, well, I kind of think we ought to do this and so. And you may have been in situations where the president said, then are you making a motion that we do this and so? Yeah, I make that motion. Well, that's tacky too. What's wrong with that little scenario I just gave you? I kind of think we ought to do such and such. Are you making that motion? Yeah, I make that motion.
It's unclear what you specify what that particular person wants.
Good, right. You need to have exactly in the wording of the main motion what it is you want the group to vote on. And if it's just a sort of ambiguous notion, the secretary won't be sure what to write down. In many organizations, it's required that you turn it in on a slip of paper. If this is a big convention, you may even have NCR, no carbon required paper, that makes triplicate copies. So the presiding officer gets one, the secretary gets one, the maker of the motion gets to keep one. So it's written out and it's signed by the maker of the motion. So there, excuse me, so there is no doubt about what the motion is that has been written down. Then if the presiding officer reads it incorrectly, one of the other two people can say, excuse me, look again at the ink, or maybe it's written down incorrectly, in which case the presiding officer needs to clean that wording up on the front end and make sure that this is what the person wanted to have said. Because the motion, the main motion that is stated by the presiding officer is the motion that's on the floor. And if the one that is if what is read is different from what's written on the piece of paper, it's the one that is heard by the assembly that counts. That's also why some organizations tape record the whole meeting. If this is the city council, the faculty senate, any kind of group that is a deliberative body with a constituency and so on, then you want to be sure that you have that wording exactly right. So the motion then is stated by the chair, then it becomes the property of the assembly. Once I say to you, it has been moved and seconded that the trash cans in this clubhouse be painted red, white, and blue. Now it's open to discussion. So I should then say, is there any discussion? Sometimes they'll say, is there any debate? Same thing. But it is then the property of the assembly. And after that, if the person who made the main motion decides they don't like it, you know, sometimes you listen to the debate and you go, oh gee, that wasn't such a good idea after all. Occasionally you'll hear someone say, well, I withdraw my motion. Well, if nobody objects, okay, but technically it's the property of the assembly at that point and you need permission to withdraw it. Most of the time people grant that and there's no problem with it, but technically it needs the approval of the assembly to do that. So we've got this motion on the floor and I've said, is there any discussion or is there any debate? Then it's open to discussion and debate. How long can you talk about it? You weren't supposed to have read this for today, but you know, just any gut instinct, can you talk about a motion forever? Well, you could, but well, not quite. Under Robert, you have the right to speak 2 times for 10 minutes on a motion. And you have to wait your turn. You know, you don't get your second turn until everyone else who wants a turn has had theirs. Now, most groups aren't that tolerant. If they know they have a very vocal organization, they'll adopt some rules about debate on the front end. Maybe limiting it to 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 5 minutes. We'll talk about limiting debate more later on. But you alternate your speakers, you take turns. You don't recognize one person 3 or 4 times when other people seeking recognition have not been recognized. And there's a 10-minute limit on the debate and a limit of 2 turns per speaker. You also alternate sides wherever possible if you have people affirmative and negative, for and against. Maybe I recognize a couple of people and they both speak in favor of the motion, and then I would say, ideally, after I recognize someone who spoke in favor of the motion, I would say, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Yeah. Now, that's important, one, in the interest of fair hearing, okay? But it's also important from a logical standpoint, because if everybody in the room is in favor of the motion, unless you're just wanting to be heard and have your remarks recorded in the minutes, which takes place with some groups, but unless that's the case, if I say, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion, maybe we're done and you're ready to vote. And there's no point in having 15 out of 50 people speak in favor of it, trying to convince people that the motion ought to be adopted when there wasn't anybody opposed to it in the first place. So in the interest of hearing both sides of the issue and in kind of informally finding out where the organization, where the assembly is in its sentiment on the topic, that works very well. Okay, so discussion has ended. We'll talk in a minute about how to move to closed debate, but we're not there yet. If I say, is there any further discussion, and there isn't, then I can say, if there's no further discussion, the chair will put the question to a vote. When you're presiding, you never say, I'm going to put the question to a vote. You refer to yourself like an inanimate object. So the chair will put the question to a vote. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. And then you announce the result of the vote. You always call for both sides, even if it appears that everyone in the room has voted in favor of the motion, in the interest of courtesy and because you might have overlooked someone. You ask, are there any, all those opposed to the motion say no. And then you announce the result of the vote. The motion failed or the motion carried. If the motion carries, then you announce the result of what will be done. The motion is adopted and the trash cans will be painted red, white, and blue. The motion is adopted and we will pursue purchasing a computer or whatever the action is. Okay, is there any other way that you can get business on the floor?
Citizens' comments?
Okay, those aren't really action items. Those are things that you hear and all. So they're not up for voting on, but they are things that might be read into the record. And we haven't gone into committee reports at length yet, but just kind of in a nutshell, if a committee report has action items in it, then the chair of the committee moves the adoption of the report, and those action items or recommendations in the report come up as motions under business. And we'll get to that more later on. If a committee report is given for information only, then it's received and filed, but you don't actually have to vote on it. Okay, the other primary way that we get business is through a resolution. Now, you can't have a main motion and a resolution on the floor at the same time, so we're going to push this motion over here out of the way for a minute. A resolution you typically identify as one of those things that has whereas this, whereas, whereas, whereas. It may have 1 or 2, it may have 15 or 20 whereases up there. Therefore, whereas this is true, whereas that is true, etc., etc. Therefore, be it resolved that, and here comes the punchline, normally in a single sentence, although you may have more than one resolved clause too. And if you do, you vote on them separately. We'll get to more of that later on as well. But the resolution states what you want the group to do. So it might say something like, whereas our current computer keeps crashing, whereas the current printer is of poor quality, whereas there are sufficient funds in the Treasury to purchase a computer system not exceeding $5,000, whereas we want this organization to be a timely, image-conscious group, whereas, therefore, be it resolved that this civic club, whoever we are, that this organization purchase a new printer, a new computer and printer at a cost not to exceed $5,000 or $3,000, whatever number you want to put in there. But that puts the rationale in there as well, and that way the makers of the motion who are presenting this, and sometimes you read these, sometimes they're distributed to the group so that people have them in hand at the beginning of the meeting and can be thinking about it. But it gets all of your best arguments up there in the whereas clauses. But the whole resolution comes on the floor. Usually it's about a page, but you know, they can run longer than that. They may be a fat paragraph, a half a page, 1 page. Got some variation in that. Okay, if you had a resolution on the floor, where does your gut instinct tell you you would start with it? Would you just start at the top and work your way through? Okay, Robert says no, because why argue over the whereas clauses if you don't know whether or not you agree on the resolution itself? So this is a case where you would separate the parts. This has the status of a main motion, but because it's more complicated, you have to separate it for the time being. And so you vote on the resolved clause first. If there's more than one resolved clause, you normally would separate them, unless you knew that you had strong sentiment to support the whole thing. And we'll come to an incidental motion next week or so that says consideration by paragraph or consideration seriatim, which simply means part by part. But you vote on the resolve clause first, because if that fails, then the whole resolution is gone. If the resolve clause passes, then you want to go back and look at the whereases and make sure everybody agrees with those. Often when you have a resolution, you're going to send it somewhere, to the president, to the city council, to the mayor, to the superintendent of the school board. You know, often when you go to the trouble to write things out like that, they're destined to be sent somewhere. And it may be that the organization as a whole believes in the resolve clause, but 2/3 or a portion of the people support most of the whereases, but not all of them. Maybe they think 1 or 2 of the whereases are kind of inflammatory, or they're rudely stated, or they're just not very good arguments. You know, there are reasons from time to time to delete some of those. Okay, so these are the 2 main ways that we get business on the floor. Both have the status of a main motion, and that's going to become important as we continue today talking about the priority of the motions and of the 13 that have to be kept in order. Now later on we'll get to some things called Class B motions, like discharge a committee or amend something previously adopted, if you've seen those in Robert. We'll get to those later on. I brought one in, take from the table. We'll be talking later today about the motion to lay something on the table or set it aside. Well, at some point you have to take it back from the table. And when you have a motion like discharge a committee or take from the table, then that has the status of the main motion. And you can't make a main motion while that's on the table. You couldn't propose a resolution while that's on the table. Now, there can only be one item that has the status of the main motion. So today we're just kind of saying, okay, there could be some other things. And as we pursue this semester, anything that's coded red has the status of a main motion. Okay, but today, that is main motion, yes, okay. Today, we're just going to talk about plain old main motions, things like buying a computer or painting the walls or whatever. There are other specific things too relating to voting and nominations that are called incidental main motions, but those are on hold for the time being too. Okay, there's a strange little motion. There are 13 of them that have to stay in order, from main motion up to recess and adjourn and fix the time to adjourn, and we're going to overview those today. Now there's a strange motion that comes in here next called postpone indefinitely. You very seldom see it used, but if people were to use it, it could be very useful. Now what this motion does, in contrast to one that says postpone to a certain time or lay on the table, which we'll come to in a little while, this one says, I want to postpone, I move to, you wouldn't say I want to, I move to postpone this main motion, whatever, and you would state it. I want to postpone it indefinitely. And that's really like postponing it to eternity. And if this is adopted, it kills that motion. Maybe you think it's a really stupid motion, but in debate, you don't want to say, this is the dumbest motion that Michael has ever made in his whole life, and therefore I'm opposed to it. Instead, everybody kind of has a sense of, oh gee, they could have done a lot, whoever made the motion. You know, Susan could have done a whole lot better with the motion, but let's don't try to fix this one. Let's just get rid of it, and then the floor will be open. You know, once we get rid of it, then the floor is open again for a new main motion. So a nice way to dump a really crummy motion, or one that you're just opposed to and you think you can get a majority vote to carry it, takes a majority to adopt a main motion. We'll come back to votes required and review those later too. Takes a majority vote to adopt postpone indefinitely. So if a majority of the people want to kill this, okay, bye-bye. But you don't see this one used very often. The other thing this motion will do, if you're in a situation where you have exhausted the right to debate, everybody's had, maybe there are 10 of us and we've all used up our turns on debate, we could modify debate, and we'll come to that motion in a little while. Or this motion reopens the main motion and everybody is again entitled to 2 turns speaking for or against that motion. Okay, the next one in order you're probably most familiar with is the motion to amend. And in this case, the motion to amend refers to the main motion. Okay? The motion to postpone indefinitely is not amendable. So for right now, I'm going to pull this one out. We'll deal with it more later on, but I want you to look at what you're probably most familiar with. And that is a main motion that's sitting on the floor and somebody moves to amend it. Okay, there are a lot of ways to amend. Let's go back to the trash can issue. You know, somebody moved to paint those trash cans red, white, and blue. In the interest of Cougar spirit, someone could move to amend that main motion by striking blue. And if we just take blue out, then we're left with red and white trash cans. And if that carries, you know, we have discussion, all in favor of the amendment, all opposed, the amendment passes or carries. You can also have an amendment to the amendment, and I'm just going to stick a little temporary tag up on here right now, because we're going to find out that there are a lot of these, of the motions that we consider to be core motions, they are also amendable. And later on we'll stack up, oh, I don't know, 20 or 25 things here and look at how complicated it can get. So you have a primary amendment, and then you may have a little secondary amendment, which is simply the amendment to the amendment. So we have the paint the trash cans red, white, and blue. Someone moves to strike blue and insert black. And then someone moves to strike black and insert gold. But the secondary amendment has to be germane, G-E-R-M-A-N-E, germane to the primary amendment. Okay, so we'll just kind of make that little mental note right now that this is one of those motions that's amendable, but we're keeping it simple today. Okay, we may amend that main motion by striking out the color blue. We could strike and insert. We could just add. You could have it, I move the trash cans be painted red, white, and blue, and someone adds and black, so that you have 4 colors in there. But anyway, whatever you're amending, you can amend by taking out part, which is called striking. You can add something on by inserting additional words, or you can add on to the end sometimes. And sometimes you strike out and insert. You take out a word or a phrase and put in some new wording. So you've got several options there. Sometimes you strike out the whole motion and have a substitute motion. But except to mention that today we're going to hold on that idea too. Faculty Senate recently got into a mess with that because they didn't process it quite as properly as they should have, but the person who was frustrated didn't know to raise a point of order and point it out, so it became water under the bridge. Okay? I brought one example along that says point of order. We're going to get to a whole set of motions that, remember when we talked about classification of motions, we said there are also incidental motions, and incidental motions pop up wherever they're applicable. And point of order is the one that you're most likely to see. So if I say, we get this amendment and I say it's been moved and seconded to amend the main motion to do whatever it is, all in favor say aye. Is there anything wrong with that? Have I made an error yet? You don't know. You've been studying for the midterm. Okay. Yeah, there's a problem because the motion to amend is debatable. So somebody who's really on their toes should say, point of order, Madam Chairman, or Ms. President, or whoever I am on the given day. Point of order, the motion to amend is debatable. Ah, your point is well taken. See, this incidental motion just pops up right when it's needed, and you take care of it right there on the spot. So, your point of order is well taken. The chair apologizes. Okay, we took care of that. The floor is open for discussion on the amendment. Okay, and so we're trucking along in the discussion, and I recognize a person for the 3rd time. Point of order, Madam Chairman. That speaker has already spoken 2 times on this motion. Point of order is well taken. Okay. So then we put it to a vote. We get through with all of our discussion, and I say, are you ready for the vote? And I don't hear any further discussion. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. There were 16 in favor and 14 opposed. The motion fails. Point of order, Madam Chairman. Maybe I said the motion fails for lack of a 2/3 vote. Point of order, Madam Chairman. The motion to, now if I'm that bad, I shouldn't be chairing the meeting, but here we go. Point of order, Madam Chairman. The motion to amend takes a majority vote, not a 2/3. Okay? Or maybe I say the vote is 16 to 14, the motion carries, and somebody jumps up and says, point of order, Madam Chairman, that required a 2/3 vote. No, it doesn't. Your point of order is not well taken. You don't say, no, you made a mistake, or no, that's not right. You say your point of order is not well taken. The motion to amend does require only a majority vote. But see how point of order can just pop up in all sorts of situations, and when it does, you take care of it. And it's the most frequently used, in most groups, the most frequently used and the most important of the incidental motions. Okay, so we've got this main motion on the floor, we've got the amendment pending. Do you think of anything that you've ever seen happen to motions besides amending them? Ever send something to committee? Okay. The next motion in order is the motion to refer to committee. Because sometimes we talk and we fix and we fix, or we try to fix, the amendments keep failing, it's obvious we're bogging down, we're using too much time on this particular motion, and people are just tired of it. And so someone says, I move that this motion, and that's referring to the main motion, I move that the motion be referred to committee. Now, if there's already a committee that deals with this sort of thing, if this is a scholarship issue or a membership issue or a fundraising issue, a budgetary matter, you know, we've talked about bylaws and those committees that are listed in the bylaws. And if those, of those committees listed in the bylaws, those are your standing committees. Okay? And if it appropriately goes to one of those committees, then all you would have to do is say something like, I move that we refer this motion to the Budget Committee for further investigation. Is there a second to the motion? Okay, refer to committee is debatable. So we talk about, should this go to committee or not, and then eventually we would vote on it. Okay, now if there's not a standing committee that can be used, then we have to specify a special committee, a new committee. And the maker of the motion will have to tell where you want the motion to go. Okay, I move that this be referred to a special committee of 3 people appointed by the President who will investigate and report back at our next meeting. Or I move that this be referred to a committee of 5 people to be appointed by the Executive Committee who will report back at our next quarterly meeting. But, you know, what committee do you want it to go to? If it's a special committee, how is that committee going to be formed? Is it volunteers appointed by the President, selected by the Executive Committee, some combination of that? But you can't just say, I move to refer this to committee, and everybody votes yes, and it's gone. You know, where did it go to? Well, how will we ever get a report back? Should the President appoint the chair of the committee? Or should the committee elect its own chair? You know, you have some, we'll get to more on committees as we go along. But, you know, what is this special committee? How is it going to function? How is it going to be formed? When, especially when should it report back to the parent organization that formed it? Now, if something goes to committee, it takes everything with it. If we've got that postpone indefinitely sitting there on the floor, we'll stick it in for just a moment. We've got postpone indefinitely. We've got the amendment to the amendment stuck on there. And so all this stuff is out there, you know, we're going, oh, gee, what do we want to do with this? When it goes to committee, the whole thing leaves, which is why people often refer it to committee. And then the floor is open for new business, and we can go over here and pick up a resolution or something that was tabled at a previous meeting, whatever. Okay, we'll get it back out here and we'll keep the stack a little shorter. Okay, so here we are discussing whether or not to refer this to committee. Now, one of the things we could do is postpone it to a certain time. And in some books, you'll see this called postpone definitely. Put these over here for a moment. Okay, postpone to a certain time or postpone definitely. They mean the same thing. We know it's important. We don't have enough information right now, perhaps, to deal with it adequately. For whatever reason, we need to attend to other things on the agenda. We need to get this off the floor, but we don't want to lose it. So you can say and make a motion to the effect that says, I move that we postpone this motion until 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. I move that we postpone this motion until our next regular meeting. You can even make it a special order, but we won't bog down in that, and give it a top priority at the next meeting. But postpone definitely says until when you want it postponed. It needs a second. That's open to debate. Okay, takes a majority vote. And if a majority of the people agree, then whoosh, here it goes to whatever time you have postponed that. Okay, now maybe we're bogging down in whether or not we ought to postpone it. Okay, because that's debatable, that's amendable. So we could have an amendment. Is this one amendment? Okay. We could have an amendment to the amendment. We could have an amendment to refer to committee. Okay. Maybe somebody thinks it should be a committee of 7 instead of a committee of 5. So we're arguing about that. You're arguing, I'm just presiding. Okay. Then we get postponed definitely on the floor. And that's amendable because maybe one person wants it to come up next time and somebody else thinks we ought to wait 2 meetings. Let's give it 2 weeks. So here we are with all of this stuff on the floor. Open to discussion, needs a majority vote. It's all amendable. Somebody's getting really sick of it at 10 minutes per person, per issue, per item, and so forth, and says, I move to limit debate to 2 minutes per person. Well, this one is not debatable. Thank goodness. But it is amendable. Because somebody's sitting over here and says, well, they shouldn't be saying anything, but they think 2 minutes is just not enough. So they move to strike 2 and insert 3. Now look what a mess we have before us. Well, somebody else is just fed up and wants to get the whole thing off the floor. And they say, I move the previous question. Sturgis calls this vote immediately. Some books will call it closed debate. But it means I want us to stop talking and start voting. Okay, there's been enough nonsense. You can even, although it very seldom happens, you could, if you're in a hurry, you could say, I move the previous question on all pending motions, which means I want us to vote immediately on everything that's on the floor. Now, previous question and limit debate both take a 2/3 vote. Previous question is not debatable and it's not amendable. Once somebody moves that and there's a second, you vote on whether or not to close debate. But these two take a 2/3 vote. You want to venture a guess why? Remember our first discussion that said we want to be sure that majority rules, but we also want to do what? Protect. Okay, well, the rest of the people that aren't there, but what about the people who are there? Okay, you want to protect the rights of the minority. And when you start closing debate, cutting off debate, when you start limiting debate, that's when you really start impacting the rights of the minority. So at that point, Robert and Sturgis agrees, Farwell and some others disagree, but Robert says it takes a 2/3 vote, and when you start trying to remember which motions take 2/3, which uses a majority, the rule of thumb is going to be if it significantly impacts the right of the minority, it's going to take a 2/3 vote. If it cuts off the right of the minority to be heard, it will take a 2/3 vote. So here we are with these two pending, and we say anything that's on the floor is pending. And the one up here on the top of the stack, whether it's the stack on this table or you'll get to a point where you can stack them up in your head. The top of your cognitive stack is the immediately pending motion. So in this case, this one is the immediately pending motion. And so we've got this motion pending. We're about to put it to a vote. And once you start voting, you have to finish the vote. Somebody can't interrupt. If I say all in favor, say aye. And as I'm taking a breath, someone jumps up and says, Madam Chairman, the only thing I'm going to listen to at that point is a point of order. And I would probably say something like, does the speaker rise to raise a point of order? And if the answer is no, then I'll say there is a vote in process. You will have to wait. Okay? But you can't jump up and all in favor, say aye. Madam President, I move to recess. You have to wait until the vote is completed. But before I put it to a vote, at the point where someone says, I move the previous question, second. At that point, or even as I am saying, it has been moved and seconded to order the previous question, at that point you can still say something. As soon as I start saying all those in favor, that's where the line is. Okay, up to that point where I've stated the motion, someone could rise and say, I move to lay this whole matter on the table. I just move to table it. Now the difference between postpone, and that takes a second, that needs a majority vote. It's not debatable, it's not amendable. But it's a way of holding on to this whole package for a little while. Okay? And so I would then say, is there a second? It's been moved and seconded to lay this issue on the table. That's the main motion, with everything adhering, that's a key word, A-D-H-E-R-I-N-G. Everything that's adhering or sticking to the main motion would go with it. So it's been moved and seconded to lay this issue, this motion on the table. All those in favor say aye, those opposed no. The ayes have it, the matter's tabled. Then the whole thing goes to the table. Okay, we talked earlier about, there's our red one. Now, if we table all of this, then it may come back, it's gone, the floor is open for new business. We can take it from the table as soon as there has been intervening business. There could be a motion to recess, there could be another main motion with all this stuff that we deal with. As long as there's been an intervening piece of business, it can come back that soon, or it can come back a month later. It may never come back. If we put it on the table and no one ever moves to take it from the table, it won't come back. But if we, later the same day or later in the same convention or at next week's meeting, whatever, if we move to take it from the table, then it's all back on the floor again in that original package. And that's why the secretary needs to be taking really good minutes. The chairman needs to be paying attention, because at any point, 30 minutes later, a week later, if that comes back on the floor, the presiding officer and the secretary, and hopefully the whole assembly, will know what this whole deal is. And if you left your file folder at home, or the secretary didn't bring the minute, whatever reason, you don't have the exact wording of that motion, the wording of the amendment, the wording of the proposed amendment to the amendment, et cetera, you're going to have a very difficult time dealing with it, and there will be a lot of confusion. Okay, this one, and let me put indefinitely back in for just a minute, because that could be on the floor too. Now you have up here 3, 6, 7 motions in addition to the main motion. And these are the motions called subsidiary. Remember when we talked about classification of motions, we said they may be main, they may be incidental, they may be, and incidental was like point of order. For our purposes, the incidental motions are colored green. And they may be restoratory motions, and we've got those color-coded in red. So for our, but you'll just have to learn these eventually, because unless you take a marker along with you and color code your business as you go. Most of the time, you know, they're not under any color coding system, but just so it will help you visualize them that way. Okay, we've got 7 motions here that are subsidiary motions. Ignore those little amend tags because they're all, just ignore them for this purpose. Okay, we've got 7 motions that are subsidiary to the main motion, meaning you cannot have these on the floor without a main motion. Now you could have them on the floor with a resolution. Okay, we can look at them that way for a minute. They wouldn't all, wherever take from the table went to, they wouldn't all apply to that one. But we'll let them sit here on the resolution for a little while and pretend we have all these whereases and resolves sitting in there. Okay, now we haven't talked about the privileged motions yet. There are 5 privileged motions. I'm going to have to move this over so I can see you before we get through. The 5 privileged motions are call for the orders of the day, raise a question of privilege, recess, we're going to come back and talk about each one, adjourn, and fix the time. The full title of this one is Fix the Time to Which to Adjourn. But we couldn't get at that on this block in large enough ink for you to see it at home. Okay? And these 5 belong up here on top. And this makes up, if it'll stand here, the 13 ranking motions. And these you have to learn in order. And we'll talk more about why. But let's pull the top 5 off for a minute. Okay. Okay. Call for the orders of the day is what you do. It doesn't happen very often, but it's the motion you use if you think the group has gotten off the agenda. Now maybe we've got this motion to lay on the table there, but for whatever reason, some incidental things pop up that we won't go into right now. But things occur and the group gets off track. Maybe somebody comes into the room and says, shall I put the coffee pot on? Oh yeah, good idea. Yeah, this meeting is running long. Thanks a lot. We appreciate that. And then somebody turns and says, why do we always have coffee? You know, don't they ever have any hot tea or hot chocolate around here? And then someone said, well, you know, we could get some hot chocolate. Should we do that? And so we get off on the discussion of whether we should order these little packets of soup and hot tea and hot apple cider and all these other little goodies. And somebody's going, what is going on here? You know, all this business is on the floor. So instead of saying, Madam Chairman, this is a stupid discussion, we're off the track, would you please make the people follow the agenda? You can just say, Madam Chairman, I call for the orders of the day, and that's in order. And that's the polite way of saying, could we please get back on the agenda, you know, so that maybe we can go home today sometime. Okay. Now, while all of that is pending, you decide you just can't wait. Oh, well, let's see. The next one up is a question of privilege. So that's pending. The chair hasn't ruled on it yet, but somebody jumps up and says, I rise to a question of personal privilege. Now, we'll see that there are some other low-level privilege requests that we'll get to on another day. But question of privilege, Madam Chairman, it is so hot in this room, or it's so cold in this room, I urgently request that the chair adjust the temperature immediately. Or maybe we're in a big assembly hall and all the curtains on the west side are open and we've been here so long the sun is setting and there's all this glare. You know, there's a silhouette behind the presiding officer and there's sun in the faces of the people. Anyway, a question of privilege is something that affects the welfare of the whole organization, or at least a great number of the members. Maybe there's a no smoking rule and you've got people in the back who are lighting up because we haven't had a break and you know they're going crazy needing a cigarette. But sun in the face, temperature off, just whatever the privilege issue is. The microphone's too loud, we're going deaf. The microphone's too low, we can't hear people. A common question of privilege is to ask that people step to the microphone to speak because they can't be heard in the back of the room. So, okay, we got all this stuff pending on the floor, and somebody's dying for a potty break or whatever, they're just tired of sitting there, and so they say, I move we recess. Is there anything wrong with that motion? Okay, it needs to say how long, you know, because you don't want me to rap the gavel and say, okay, this meeting is recessed. Well, when do we come back? You know, when the PA system starts blaring and I'm saying, okay, I've decided the recess is over. No, we need to know before we leave. We need to know before we vote, before you vote, because it may affect the way that you vote. You may think a 5-minute recess is not long enough. You may think a 30-minute recess is too long. So guess what? This one's amendable. Okay? If the motion itself is debatable, then the amendment is debatable. In this case, the motion to recess is not a debatable motion. So you can amend it, but you can't argue about the amendment. If someone said, I move we recess for 5 minutes, it's been moved and seconded to recess for 5 minutes. Madam Chairman, Chair recognizes Ms. Smith. I move to strike 5 and insert 15. Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to strike 5 and insert 15. All in favor of amending the motion to strike 5 and insert 15 minutes, say aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment carries. The motion now before you is, we'll take that little amendment off. The motion before you is that the Assembly recess for 15 minutes. And before I put that to a vote, somebody jumps up and says, I move we adjourn. And the tone of voice says, I've had enough of this. You know, could we all go home now, please? Okay. Move to adjourn. Somebody seconds that. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Maybe there's a perceptive member out there who realizes that we're not scheduled to meet again for 3 months or 6 weeks, and we've got all this business. Besides this mess that's on the floor right now, we still have another 23 agenda items that we need to deal with. But here it is, 11 o'clock at night, and we're really ready to go home. Now, as presiding officer, I can say to you, you have before you the motion to adjourn. The chair would simply remind you that we have an additional 23 items on our agenda. Well, the highest ranking motion, which is good for the stack of our blocks as well as the world, I guess, is the motion to fix the time to which to adjourn. And this one says, I move that when we adjourn, well, what it says is, I move that when we adjourn, we reconvene at time X. Now, I move to fix the time to which to adjourn to 10 a.m. tomorrow morning or 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. It can be the same day, it can be the next day, it can be a week later. It just but it needs to be before the next time that we would have met anyway, or there's no point in making it. But it specifies the time. It's creating a recessed meeting of a sort. It's like a long recess. But it gives us a time to meet again so that we know when to reconvene. Okay, it needs a second. It's not debatable, but it is amendable. Because maybe somebody said, I move to fix the time to which to adjourn to 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's been moved and seconded to fix the time to which to adjourn. You have to get your tongue lined up right to do that one. To 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Madam Chairman, Chair recognizes Member X. I move to strike 10 a.m. and insert 8:30 a.m. And, you know, it's obvious the person thinks you need more time. We need an earlier start. Is there a second to the motion to amend by striking 10 a.m. and inserting 8:30 a.m.? Seconded. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to strike 10 a.m., insert 8:30 a.m. All in favor, say aye. It's not open to discussion. Takes a majority vote. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Now, we're going to peel these things. These are your 13 ranking motions, whether it's a main motion or a resolution down here on the bottom or a motion that you've brought back from a previous meeting that was tabled and is now on the floor. So you have 5 privileged motions. You have 7 subsidiary motions, and that's it. There's a long list of incidental motions that we'll get to next week. There are at least 5 motions that are restoratory that bring business back to the Assembly, and then there's a handful of others that have like open nominations and closed nominations and motions that relate to voting procedures that kind of, they have the status of a main motion, but they're not open to all of this. But these 13 have to stay in order. Now we're going to look at that a little further in just a minute. But we're ready to dispose of all of this, okay? And I want you to get a feel for the language that's going on, if I can remember the motions I made up as we went. Okay, the immediately pending motion is what? What's the last thing that was made in this stack? Was it this one? Shake your heads at least. No. Was it this one? No. Was it this one? No. It's this little amendment sitting out here. So the immediately pending motion is the amendment to the motion to fix the time to which to adjourn. So I'm going to say to the Assembly, you have an amendment pending, immediately pending. All in favor of striking 10 a.m., inserting 8:30 a.m., say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and I'm just going to make up the answers here. The ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. The motion before the Assembly now is to fix the time to which to adjourn to 8:30 a.m. tomorrow morning. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The noes have it, and the motion fails. The motion now before the Assembly is whether or not to adjourn. Tell me if I get off here. Okay. The motion before you is the motion to adjourn. All in favor of adjourning say aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The motion is adjourned. The meeting is adjourned. If it goes that way, then all of this slides over, and I won't try to move it, and lands under unfinished business. Okay, but for our purposes today, the motion to adjourn is failing. The motion to adjourn has failed. Maybe it's only 9 p.m. and we're good for another hour or two. I'm going to put these over here and let you watch them peel off in reverse order. Okay, where are we? Okay, motion to recess. It's been moved to recess. The motion before the Assembly now is the motion to recess for 15 minutes. All in favor of recessing say aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it. We will have a 15-minute recess. I might smack the gavel if I have one, and everybody rushes outside to get their Cokes and junk food and coffee and potty break and try to persuade the other side to vote, you know, whatever all it is you choose to do on a recess. Maybe it's just kick back and breathe for a minute. Okay. About 13 minutes later, I would probably go to the microphone and say, we are about 2 minutes from reconvening the meeting. Delegates, please find your seats. Please encourage the people in the hall to come in, et cetera, et cetera. But if you have a very large group, it's a nice idea to give them some kind of warning and all. And then when that 15 minutes is up, I would say, okay, the group having been in recess for 15 minutes, this meeting is now reconvened, and probably smack the gavel again. So that got that one out of the way. Okay, now that we're back in session, there was a question of privilege raised about whether or not the drapes should be closed in the back of the room. The chair granted that request on the break and had the pages close those drapes. So that's taken care of. Or maybe it's not taken care of and that's back up. The chair is uncertain now that the sun is further down the horizon whether the delegates wish to have the drapes closed or not. And so I would simply like to put it to a vote. Maybe there's a lovely view of greenery and waterfalls and whatever out there. You know, and so I don't know whether you want the drapes closed or not. Those of you who would like to have the drapes closed, please say aye. Those opposed, no. And the ayes have it, and so I'll request that the pages go over and close the drapes. Or the noes have it, and the request is denied. There's a motion for appealing that too, but we won't get into that today. Okay, then we're back to call for the orders of the day. Usually that's taken care of, but if this were left pending, I would say we did have a request calling for the orders of the day, and the chair agrees that that's appropriate, and let's try to stay on the agenda so we get out of here before midnight. But we would need to address that if it was left on the floor. Okay, then we had pending the subsidiary motions, and the motion before you now is the question of whether or not we should lay on the table this motion. Those in favor, and this one's not debatable, okay, and it's not amendable. Those in favor of laying the motion on the table say aye. Those opposed say no. If the ayes have it, then the whole thing, as we talked about a while ago, gets tabled. The noes have it, and the motion is not tabled. So the pending question now is the motion to close debate. The previous question was moved and seconded way back here. All in favor of closing debate, ordering the previous question, and I usually phrase it both ways to make sure everybody knows what we're talking about. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. There are 2/3 in the affirmative, so the previous question has been ordered. And if it's just moved like that, it only refers to the next motion. Occasionally, but it usually fails, occasionally somebody will say, I move the previous question on all pending motions. So know that that's an option, but it doesn't happen very often. Okay, previous question has been ordered. It was ordered on the motion adjacent to it. So the question before the assembly is whether or not to limit debate to, whatever we said, 3 minutes per person on each motion. All in favor, say aye. And once we've ordered previous question, we can't discuss it, we can't amend it. We are going to vote immediately on the previous question. And see, this one's previous to that one. It was made just before that one. So that's the previous question. If that one weren't on the floor and we ordered the previous question, then we would vote immediately on this one, and so forth on down the line. Okay, but we ordered the previous question, so you're voting on limiting debate. All in favor, all opposed. The ayes have it. Debate will now be limited to 3 minutes per speaker. The chair would like to request that one of the pages function as a timekeeper and give hand signals each minute and on the last half minute. So we've got, well, let's see, we had an amendment stuck on there. That was to change the 2 minutes to 3 minutes. We'd vote on that first and then vote on this one. Okay, let's see, is this postponed to a certain time? And we had an amendment on that changing the time. So the motion before you now is whether or not to postpone this to meeting after next, whatever. All in favor, all opposed, takes a majority vote. That failed. The noes have it, the amendment failed. The motion before you is to postpone, the main motion, and adhering motions, to postpone this issue to our next regular meeting. All in favor say aye, all opposed say no. The noes have it, the motion failed. Now we're back to refer to committee, and let's see, we were going to, the amendment said strike 5 and insert 7, I think, something like that. Okay, the motion before you now is to refer this matter to committee, pardon me, you have a pending motion to refer to committee, but the immediately pending motion is to strike 5 and insert 7. All in favor of striking 5 and inserting 7 say aye. All opposed say no. The noes have it. The amendment fails. You're now voting. Is there further discussion? Okay, because we haven't ordered the previous question. We would have gotten a point of order back there too, because that amendment was open to discussion. And I rushed right along. And that happens sometimes. Okay, so now we're voting on, the floor is open for discussion on whether or not to refer this matter to a committee of 5. And maybe we take some discussion. Then someone can say, I move the previous question. If they do that and it's seconded, then it takes a 2/3 vote to close debate. If they don't do that, but I don't hear, if no one does that, and I don't hear any further discussion, then I may simply say, is there further discussion? If not, the chair will put the question to a vote. Pause, look, listen. Hearing no further discussion, then you are voting on whether or not to refer this issue to a committee of 5 people. All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the motion goes to committee, and then it all goes to committee. Or if the motion fails, the matter will not be sent to committee. We have an amendment here. Okay, I've forgotten what the amendment said. Something, but anyway, we open it up to discussion, vote on the amendment. It either passes or fails. We'll say it passed this time. We'll stick it back on there. Passed. Okay, now you're voting on the amendment as amended. Or the question on the floor is the amendment as amended. Is there further discussion on the amendment as amended? Hearing none, we'll put it to a vote, or somebody moves the previous question and we go that route. Okay, we're voting on the amendment as amended. All in favor, all opposed, takes a majority vote. Maybe the amendment fails. Okay, either way, it's disposed of. All right, then we're down to postpone indefinitely if that one was on the floor. Like I said, usually at this point you're back to the main motion, either as amended or not amended. But if you had indefinitely on the floor, then discussion would be open. Again, after all of this, discussion is now open on the motion to postpone indefinitely. We go through that. You're through talking about it. All in favor? All opposed? If it carries, whoosh, the whole thing went to eternity, never to return in this form. It may come back as a new main motion at a subsequent meeting. Okay, but it won't be back today. And after all of that, you know, if you send it out to left field, probably have you might have well, I guess you wouldn't have a frustrated group, not have a frustrated presiding officer. We went through all of this, you know, and you could have postponed it to the trash can an hour ago and so forth. But probably at this point, postpone indefinitely would fail. Either way, you get it disposed of, and you're back to the main motion, either as amended or in its original form. But the last thing that you get to is that main motion. It's open to discussion again. It's open to amendment. And maybe we're all the way back to here, and someone says, I move to table the motion. Is that in order? Yep. Anything over here, maybe we need to put them back in the other order now, just so you look at them right. But you can table it, you can amend it. What are we down to? We can limit, somebody can say, I move to limit the debate on the main motion to 4 minutes per person. Okay, so the motion on the floor is whether or not to limit debate. Now at that point, could somebody come along and say, I move to refer this matter to committee? No, because this motion has higher priority than this motion. So somebody should raise, this is our point of order, somebody should say, point of order, limit debate has higher priority than refer to committee. The motion to refer to committee is out of order. Your point is well taken. The motion to refer to committee is not in order at this time, so we will return to the question of limiting debate. But as soon as we voted on limiting debate, and that either passes or fails, but it's disposed of, discussion is reopened on the main motion, then someone can say, I move to refer it to committee. Maybe this time you try a different committee. Maybe we tried to send it to the budget committee last time and that didn't make it. And this time they want to send it to the membership committee. But you could remake the motion to send it to the budget committee. Maybe there's been enough discussion in between and so forth that you think now, because of issues that have emerged, that that would carry. Okay, and so then you deal with that one. Okay, but these 13 have to be kept in order. Okay, and so a good way to practice with these would be to make yourself a little deck of cards, get some index cards, maybe color code them, either match them like this or use a color system that means something to you, and then take them and scramble them all up. And ask yourself, if all of this stuff, I better look at what I pulled in here. Okay, I've got a resolution there. Okay, all of this stuff is pending on the floor, and I just dropped my cards all over the floor. And here I am, the presiding officer, and I pick them up, and this is the way that they come up. What am I going to do? If this is what is pending before the assembly, which one am I going to deal with first? Want to venture a guess? No, that one's last. Remember, it had to be made first, but all of these have been made. They were properly made and seconded, and we went through that process that we did in the beginning. And so the resolution is going to be the last one we get to. Okay, good. Yeah, that's the way you look at it. So fix the time to adjourn, to which to adjourn, is going to have the highest priority. Okay, now the ones we have here, what's next lowest? Okay, the adjourn's going to go right under that one. Then what? Recess. Okay, but what have we got staring at us in green up here? A point of order. So we're going to take that point of order first. Let me get them in order here. Previous question goes down there, and question of privilege. Okay, once you get the hang of putting them in order, and this is the way we go. We'll deal with that point of order first in case there's been an infraction of the rules, and the point will either be well taken or not well taken. Okay? Then we'll vote on fixing the time to which to adjourn. Then we'll vote on adjourn. Maybe I should keep them stacked this way. Is that better? Okay. Okay, and we'll just work our way on down the stack. Okay, next time we're going to unscramble some of these. We'll go back and review what they're for, because I know you've got a lot on your mind this weekend. But we'll review what these are for, and we'll scramble and unscramble them, because you have to keep track with these 13, the order that they're made and then the order that they're disposed of. Okay?